The smell of burnt gunpowder and pine needles is something I'll never be able to scrub out of my soul. I was holding my son's hand, feeling his pulse flutter like a dying bird, while the men who did this laughed in the driveway. They thought I was just a grieving father in a Christmas sweater. They didn't know they had just hunted the one man the Pentagon sends when ghosts need to be killed. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I remember the way the snow looked under the streetlights, pure, white, and peaceful. It was the kind of night where you're supposed to worry about whether the turkey is dry or if you bought enough batteries for the kids' toys. I'm Logan. For 20 years, my world was sand, blood, and the hum of a C-130 transport plane. I was a Navy SEAL, a senior chief with more confirmed kills than I care to count. But that night, I was just a guy trying to be a dad. My son, Mason, was 19. He was home from college, and he'd invited a few friends over for a small Christmas Eve party in our basement. My wife, Clara, was upstairs with me. We were finally at a place where the nightmares from my deployments were fading. The house felt warm. It felt safe. That was my first mistake. A warrior should never feel safe. Around 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. I figured it was just another one of Mason's friends arriving late. I was heading to the kitchen to grab a soda when the front door didn't just open. It exploded inward. The sound of a door being kicked off its hinges is unmistakable. It's a heavy, violent thud that vibrates in your teeth. Before I could even process the breach, 4 men in dark hoodies swarmed into my foyer. They weren't professionals. They were sloppy, high on adrenaline, and waving handguns like they were toys. "Where's the money, Logan?" one of them screamed. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a jagged scar running down his neck. I held my hands up, palms out. My mind shifted instantly. The dad version of me retreated, and the operator took the wheel. I was scanning them, looking at their stances, their finger placement on the triggers, the way their eyes darted. They were scared. Scared men are the most dangerous because they pull triggers by accident. "I don't have any money here," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "Take the cars. Take the jewelry. Just leave." "We know about the stash," another one yelled, his voice cracking. Downstairs, the music stopped. I heard the basement door creak open. Mason, being the brave kid I raised him to be, had heard the crash and was coming up to help. "Mason, stay back," I warned, but it was too late. Mason stepped into the hallway. The kid with the scar panicked. He didn't even look. He just swung his 9mm toward the movement and squeezed the trigger. 3 times. The sound was deafening in the small hallway. I watched in slow motion as my son was thrown backward against the wall. The white paint was instantly sprayed with a horrific, dark red. Mason slumped down, his eyes wide and confused, looking at me as if asking why this was happening. "No!" Clara screamed from the top of the stairs. The gunmen didn't even check the house. They saw what they'd done, saw the blood, and they bolted. They piled into a beat-up black SUV and screeched out of the driveway, leaving the scent of burning rubber and death behind them. I didn't chase them. Not yet. I dived for Mason. I ripped off my flannel shirt, pressing it against the holes in his chest. My hands, which had stayed steady through sniper shots in the Hindu Kush, were finally shaking. "Stay with me, Mason. Look at me, buddy," I whispered, my voice breaking. His breathing was wet, labored. He tried to speak, but only blood came up. Clara was on the floor next to us, hysterical, screaming into her phone for an ambulance. I looked at the doorway, then back at my son. In that moment, the Logan who wanted a quiet life died right there on that hardwood floor. The man who replaced him was someone I had tried to bury deep in the dirt of overseas battlefields. I looked at the shell casings on the floor. Brass. Cheap. Just like the cowards who fired them. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They were slow, bumbling, and treated the scene like a common street robbery. A detective named Miller stood in my living room, sipping lukewarm coffee while my son was being loaded into an ambulance with a 5% chance of living through the night. It's a rough neighborhood lately, Mr. Miller, the detective said, not even looking me in the eye. Probably just a gang initiation. These kids from the Iron Vipers group, they're out of control. We'll put out an APB, but don't hold your breath. I looked at Miller. He saw a broken, middle-aged man in a blood-stained undershirt. He didn't see the predator staring back at him. The Iron Vipers? I asked. My voice was a low, dangerous growl. Yeah, small-time thugs. They think they're kings of this city. Miller sighed, checking his watch. Go to the hospital. Let us handle the police work. I watched them tape off my house. I watched them walk over the evidence. I knew right then that if I waited for the system, my son's shooters would be back on the street by New Year's. I walked over to the corner of the room where a man was standing in the shadows. It was Hunter, Clara's brother. He looked pale, sweating despite the winter chill. He was looking at the blood on the floor with a strange, guilty intensity. You okay, Logan? Hunter asked, his voice trembling. I can't believe this happened. In this house. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Something in his eyes shifted. He looked away too fast. A cold realization crawled up my spine. These thugs had asked about a stash. I didn't have a stash. I was a retired vet living on a pension and some savings. Someone had told them I was rich. Someone had pointed them to my front door. I didn't say a word to Hunter. I just walked out to my garage. I walked past the lawnmower and the bicycles to the very back, where a heavy steel workbench was bolted to the floor. Underneath it, behind a false wall of drywall, sat a Pelican case that hadn't been opened in 5 years. I punched in the code. The locks hissed as the vacuum seal broke. Inside sat my customized 416 Hong Kong dollars, my Sig Sauer sidearm, encrypted comms, and a pair of high-definition night vision goggles. The world thought I was a retiree. The gang thought I was a victim. They were about to find out that when you hunt a lion, you better make sure he's dead. Because if he's just wounded, he's going to turn your world into a graveyard. I checked the magazine on my pistol, the metallic click sounding like a death knell in the quiet garage. My son was fighting for his life in room 402. And I was about to start a war that this city wouldn't forget for 100 years. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I hadn't called since I left the teams. It's Logan, I said when the line picked up. I need a ghost trace on a black SUV. And I need it 5 minutes ago. The hospital air smelled like bleach and failure. Every time the automatic doors hissed open, I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine, my hands instinctively twitching for a grip that wasn't there. I sat in a plastic chair that felt like it was made of ice, watching the red digital clock on the wall. Each second was a heartbeat my son was struggling to keep. Clara was pacing the small waiting room, her face a mask of tear-streaked ruin. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for some kind of comfort, but I had none to give. I was a hollow shell, a weapon being recalibrated. To her, I was a husband. To the world, I was a victim. But inside, I was calculating wind speeds, entry points, and the structural integrity of the human skull. Logan, say something, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please, talk to me. Tell me he's going to be okay. I looked at her, and for a second, the mask slipped. He's a fighter, Clara. He's got my blood in him. He's not going anywhere. It was a lie. I'd seen enough chest wounds in the field to know the odds. The surgeon had come out an hour ago, his green scrubs splattered with my son's life, telling us Mason was stable but critical. In medical terms, that meant he was hanging onto the world by a thread, and that thread was fraying. Detective Miller walked into the waiting room, looking even more exhausted than he had at the house. He didn't come to offer hope. He came to offer excuses. He leaned against the vending machine, clutching a folder like it was a shield. We found the SUV, Miller said, avoiding my gaze. Torched in an alley 3 miles from your place. No prints, no DNA. We're checking the local CCTV, but these guys knew the blind spots. The Iron Vipers, I said, my voice flat. That's what you called them, right? Look, Logan, Miller sighed, finally looking at me. I know who you were. I saw your file. But this isn't a desert in the Middle East. You can't just go out there kicking doors. These kids are protected by a guy named Victor. He's got lawyers, he's got muscle, and he's got half the local precinct looking the other way. If you try to play hero, you'll end up in a cell, and Mason will have no father. I stood up slowly. I was a good 6 inches taller than Miller, and I watched the color drain from his face as I stepped into his personal space. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just leaned in close enough for him to see the dead look in my eyes. "You have a badge to protect you, Miller," I whispered. "I have 20 years of experience in making people disappear. If your system doesn't find the boy with the scar on his neck in the next 12 hours, the system becomes irrelevant." Miller swallowed hard, took a step back, and adjusted his tie. "Don't do anything stupid, Logan." He turned and hurried out of the ward. I watched him go, knowing he was already calling someone to warn them. He wasn't just lazy, he was terrified. And terrified cops are usually on someone's payroll. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Hunter. My brother-in-law had followed us to the hospital, but he'd been staying in the shadows, nursing a cup of coffee that his shaking hands kept spilling. He looked like a man who was watching his own funeral. "Logan, maybe the detective is right," Hunter said, his voice thin. "These guys, they're dangerous. Maybe we should just let it go. Focus on Mason." I turned my head slowly to look at him. "Let it go? My son is in there with tubes down his throat because some punk wanted a stash that doesn't exist. How did they even know my name, Hunter? How did they know I was a vet?" Hunter's eyes darted to the floor. He started picking at a loose thread on his jacket. "I don't know, man. People talk. You know how it is. People do talk," I said, stepping closer to him. I could smell the stale sweat on him, the smell of a man who was hiding a secret. And usually, they talk when they owe money to people they shouldn't. "What's that supposed to mean?" Hunter snapped, trying to find some backbone. "It means I'm going to find out who opened my door tonight," I said. "And when I find them, I'm going to show them exactly what I did for a living." I walked away from him, leaving him trembling in the hallway. I headed toward the hospital exit. I needed to move. Staying still was making the monster in my chest roar for blood. As I reached the heavy glass doors, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from an encrypted burner number. "SUV was registered to a shell company. Trace leads to a warehouse on 4th Street. Victor's territory. Sending coordinates now." I felt a cold, familiar calm wash over me. This was the zone. The place where emotion dies and mission parameters take over. I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't a husband. I was a tier 1 asset with a target package. I drove back to my house in silence. The police tape was fluttering in the wind, a yellow reminder of the violation of my sanctuary. I went straight to the garage. I didn't need the heavy gear yet. That was for the endgame. For tonight, I needed information. I grabbed a pair of tactical gloves, a roll of duct tape, and a heavy-duty, serrated knife. I also took a small, black device from my kit, a localized signal jammer. If I was going into Victor's backyard, I wasn't going to let anyone call for backup. The warehouse on 4th Street was a crumbling brick monster surrounded by rusted chain-link fences. 2 lookouts sat in a silver sedan at the front gate, smoking and scrolling through their phones. They were relaxed. They thought the darkness belonged to them. They were wrong. The darkness has been my home since I was 19 years old. I parked 3 blocks away and moved through the shadows of the alleyways. My movement was silent, my breathing rhythmic. I slipped through a hole in the fence, staying low, using the piles of discarded tires as cover. I was behind the sedan in less than 3 minutes. I didn't use a gun. A gun makes noise. A gun is final. I needed these kids to talk. I reached through the open driver's side window, grabbed the driver by the throat, and slammed his head against the steering wheel. Before the guy in the passenger seat could react, I was around the car, the door was open, and my knife was pressed firmly against his jugular. One sound. I whispered into his ear, "And you'll be trying to hold your throat together while you bleed out on this upholstery. Do you understand?" The kid, he couldn't have been more than 18, nodded frantically, his eyes bulging. "Where's the kid with the scar on his neck?" I asked, pressing the blade just hard enough to draw a single drop of blood. "The one who shot the boy on Christmas Eve." I don't know," he whined. "Victor moved him. He sent him to the safe house." "Where's the safe house?" "I can't tell you. Victor will kill me." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a level that made the kid sob. "Victor is a man. I am the thing that men like Victor have nightmares about. You have 3 seconds to give me an address, or I start taking fingers." Okay. It's the old Pier Apartments. Room 302. I checked his pockets, took his phone, and zip-tied his hands to the grab handle of the car. I did the same to the unconscious driver. Then, I took the keys and threw them into the dark weeds of the lot. I stood up, the cold night air hitting my face. I had a location. I had a name. And I had a burning fire in my gut that only one thing could extinguish. I looked up at the moon, thinking of Mason. "Hang on, son. I'm just getting started." As I walked back to my truck, I saw a black sedan watching me from the corner. It didn't move. It just sat there, its headlights off, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I realized then that this wasn't just a gang hit. This was a setup. And the betrayal went much deeper than a simple debt. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I didn't go straight to the pier. A soldier who rushes into a trap is just a dead man with a weapon, and that black sedan following me was a clear warning. I led the tale through a series of sharp turns, doublebacks, and dead ends. Whoever was driving was good. They kept their distance and never used their high beams. It was professional. It wasn't the work of a street gang. I pulled into a crowded 24-hour gym parking lot, slipped out the passenger side while the truck was still rolling into a spot, and vanished into the shadows of a nearby alley. I watched from behind a dumpster as the black sedan cruised slowly past. It was a late-model Chevy with tinted windows. No plates. My pulse didn't even quicken. It just settled into that cold, steady rhythm I used to feel before a night raid in Fallujah. I walked 3 miles back to my house under the cover of the residential tree lines. I needed my sanctuary. I needed to see what Hunter was hiding. When I slipped through my back door, the house felt like a tomb. The police tape was still whistling in the wind. I didn't turn on the lights. I moved through the kitchen, my boots silent on the tile, and headed for the basement stairs. This was where Mason had his party. This was where the blood started. I sat on the bottom step and just breathed. I could almost hear the ghosts of the music and laughter from a few hours ago. Then, I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. Someone was in my house. I didn't reach for a gun. I grabbed a heavy glass vase from the side table and pressed myself against the wall next to the cellar door. The footsteps were heavy, uneven. A panicked gait. The door pushed open, and a sliver of moonlight caught the visitor's face. It was Hunter. He was rummaging through my desk in the corner of the living room, tossing papers aside, his breathing ragged. He looked like a man digging for his own life. I stepped out of the shadows, the vase ready. "Looking for something, Hunter?" He let out a choked scream, spinning around and slamming his back against the desk. "Logan, you scared the hell out of me. I thought you were at the hospital." I was. Then I realized the person who killed my son's peace might still be walking free. I said, walking toward him slowly. I didn't stop until I was inches from his face. "Why are you in my house at 3 in the morning, tearing through my files?" I was looking for Clara's insurance papers. She asked me to find them for the hospital billing. He stammered, his eyes darting everywhere, but at me. "Liar." The word was a gunshot. "You're looking for the ledger. You're looking for proof of the money you owe Victor." Hunter's face went from pale to ghostly white. He tried to push past me, but I caught him by the throat and pinned him against the wall. I didn't use my full strength. I didn't want to snap his neck yet, but I made sure he felt every ounce of the deadliest seal reputation I'd earned. "I saw your face at the hospital, Hunter. You didn't look sad. You looked terrified. You told those vipers I had a stash in the house, didn't you? You thought if they robbed me, your debt would be wiped clean. No. Logan, listen to me. I am listening. I growled, my grip tightening. I'm listening to your heart racing like a cornered rat. Tell me the truth, or I swear, I'll take you to that basement and show you exactly what I learned about interrogation from people who don't follow the Geneva Convention. Hunter broke. He slumped in my grip, sobbing. I didn't think they'd shoot anyone. They were just supposed to scare you. I owed Victor 50 grand from the games, the underground poker. He said he'd kill my kids if I didn't pay. He said you were a rich vet with a safe full of cash. You traded my son's life for a gambling debt, I whispered. The betrayal felt like a serrated blade twisting in my gut. This wasn't just a gang hit anymore. This was a family execution. I'm sorry, Logan. Please. Victor, he has the whole city. He's got Judge Vance and the lawyers. You can't fight them. I let go of him, and he crumpled to the floor. Judge Vance, the one who handles the city's high-profile criminal cases. He's on the payroll, Hunter choked out. He keeps the Vipers out of jail, and they keep his pockets full. That's why the cops won't do anything. It's a closed loop, Logan. You're just one man. I'm not just a man, Hunter. I'm the consequence of your choices. I reached down, grabbed him by the collar, and dragged him toward the garage. I threw him into the back of my truck and zip-tied his hands to the floor bolts. He started to scream, but I stuffed a shop rag in his mouth. He was my leverage now. He was the only one who could link the gang to the respectable men in suits. I went back to the hidden Pelican case. This time, I didn't just take the pistol. I pulled out my suppressed sniper rifle, a 12 Malawian Quatches special-purpose rifle. I checked the glass, the bolt, and the suppressor. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the garage. My face looked different. The lines of Dad were gone. The eyes were cold, distant, and focused. I looked like the man who had spent 6 months in a spider hole outside Kandahar. I looked like a ghost. My phone chimed. It was a message from the nurse I'd paid to stay by Mason's side. Mason's heart stopped. They brought him back, but he's failing. You need to come now. I stared at the screen. The urge to rush back to the hospital was a physical weight, a scream in my lungs. But I knew how this worked. If I went back, I was a sitting duck. If I wanted to save Mason, if I wanted to make sure he had a world worth waking up to, I had to finish this. I climbed into the driver's seat. Hunter was sobbing in the back, muffled by the rag. I didn't feel pity. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but the mission. The Pier apartments were a graveyard of broken dreams, a row of concrete shells overlooking the black water of the harbor. Room 302 was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a rusted parking lot. I parked 2 blocks away and moved through the shadows of the shipping containers. The air was salty and freezing. I set up my position on the roof of a warehouse across from the apartment. I lay down in the prone position, the cold concrete biting into my chest, and looked through the high-powered scope. Through the crosshairs, I saw him. The kid with the scar. He was sitting on a sofa, drinking a beer, laughing at something on the TV. He looked like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked like he hadn't just destroyed my entire universe. Next to him sat another man. Older, well-dressed. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He was talking on a burner phone, looking at his watch. I adjusted the windage on the scope. My finger hovered over the trigger. One squeeze, and the man who shot my son would be gone. But the man in the suit, he was the key. He was the link to the judge. Suddenly, the man in the suit stood up and looked directly toward my position. He smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and pulled the curtains shut. My skin crawled. He knew I was there. That's when I heard the heavy thud of a flashbang landing on the roof behind me. Drop the weapon. Hands behind your head, a voice boomed. I rolled to my left just as the roof exploded in white light and deafening sound. They didn't want the gang to kill me. They wanted the law to do it. The white light of the flashbang scorched my retinas, but I didn't blink. In the teams, we trained for this until the chaos felt like a lullaby. While the world was screaming and spinning for any other man, my body moved on muscle memory. I rolled behind a heavy industrial HVAC unit just as a hail of submachine gun fire chewed into the concrete where I had been lying a second ago. Target is mobile. Section 2, move in. A voice barked over a radio. These weren't street thugs. They moved in a diamond formation. Their gear was high-end, and their suppressed weapons whispered with professional precision. This was a private security detail, mercenaries hired by someone with a very deep pocket. Likely the man in the suit I'd just seen in the window. I stayed low, my 12 Malawian kwaches slung across my back. In the tight confines of a rooftop, a long rifle was a liability. I pulled my suppressed sidearm. I didn't need to kill them all. I needed to vanish. I reached into my tactical vest and pulled out a smoke canister, thumbing the pin and rolling it toward the stairwell door. Thick, gray phosphorus smoke billowed out, choking the rooftop. The mercenaries hesitated. They had night vision, but thermal-resistant smoke is a ghost's best friend. I slipped over the edge of the roof, grabbing a rusted fire escape railing, and swung myself down to the second-floor balcony. I didn't head for the street. That's where they'd expect me. Instead, I kicked in a window to an empty unit and moved through the darkness like a shadow. I could hear their heavy boots pounding on the roof above me. They thought they had a retired SEAL cornered. They forgot that a SEAL is most dangerous when the environment is hostile. I reached the hallway and headed straight for room 302. If they were looking for me on the roof, the package, the kid with the scar, was vulnerable. I didn't knock. I placed a small strip of breaching charge on the door frame and stepped back. Pop! The door groaned and swung open. I drifted inside, low and fast, my pistol lead-lining the darkness. The kid with the scar was scrambling for a shotgun on the coffee table. He was slow. He was sloppy. I was on him before his fingers even touched the wood. I slammed the butt of my pistol into his temple, watching his eyes roll back as he collapsed. The man in the suit was gone. The back window was open, the curtains fluttering in the freezing wind. He had used the kid as bait to keep me occupied while his hitters moved in. I grabbed the kid by his hoodie and dragged him toward the back exit. I needed to get him to my truck. I needed him to talk before the mercenaries realized I'd slipped the noose. I reached the alleyway just as a black SUV screeched to a halt at the entrance. 2 men jumped out, but I was faster. I fired 2 rounds into the engine block, the heavy slugs shattering the radiator and stalling the vehicle. While they scrambled for cover, I threw the unconscious shooter into the back of my truck, right next to a trembling Hunter. "Logan, what are you doing? They're going to kill us both." Hunter muffled through his gag. I ignored him. I slammed the truck into gear and tore out of the alley, the tires screaming against the asphalt. I drove with my lights off, using my internal map of the city to navigate the back streets. I didn't go back to the house. I headed for an old, abandoned shipyard my unit used to use for off-the-books training years ago. It was a skeleton of rusted steel and salt-rotted wood, miles from the nearest patrol car. I dragged both men out of the truck and threw them onto the cold floor of a dry dock. I pulled the rag out of Hunter's mouth and the tape off the kid's eyes. The kid with the scar woke up screaming, "You're dead. Victor is gonna peel your skin off, old man. Do you know who he is?" I sat down on a wooden crate in front of them, the moonlight casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. I began cleaning my knife with a slow, methodical stroke. "I know who he is," I said, my voice as cold as the Atlantic. "He's a man who sent a child to do a professional's job. And you're the child who shot my son." "It was just business," the kid spat, though his voice was shaking. "We were told there was a safe. We didn't know the kid would jump out." "His name is Mason," I whispered. I stood up and walked over to him, pressing the tip of the knife against the scar on his neck. "And every breath you take is a debt you owe him. Now, let's talk about the man in the suit. Who is he?" The kid shut his mouth tight, his jaw jutting out in a fake show of bravado. I looked at Hunter. "Hunter, you know him, don't you? He was in that room." Hunter was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. That's Quentin. He's the fixer for Judge Vance." He handles the money. Logan, if you touch him, there's no turning back. They'll label you a domestic terrorist. They'll hunt you with everything the state has. They already took my son, I said. They have nothing left to threaten me with. I turned back to the kid. Quentin left you behind, son. He used you as a distraction. He's probably cleaning his tracks right now, which means you're a loose end. To him, you're already dead. To me, you're an atlas. Point me to Victor's main hub, and maybe you'll live to see the sunrise from a jail cell. I ain't saying nothing, the kid hissed. I didn't argue. I grabbed his hand, laid it flat on the concrete, and drove the knife through the fleshy part of his palm. The scream that ripped out of him echoed through the shipyard, a raw, primal sound of agony. That was for the first bullet, I said, my expression unchanged. The second one goes through your knee. The third, well, you won't be awake for the third. Wait, wait, the kid sobbed, his bravado vanishing in a spray of blood. It's the foundry, on the north side. Victor stays in the office above the floor. He's got 20 guys there, all armed. It's a fortress. The foundry, I repeated. I knew the place. It was a labyrinth of heat and noise, a perfect place for a man like Victor to hide. I stood up and looked at my watch. It was 4:30 a.m. The sun would be up soon. I looked at Hunter, who was staring at me with pure horror. You're going to stay here with our friend, I told Hunter. If he moves, or if you try to leave, the silent alarm I just set will trigger a localized explosive I tucked under the truck's frame. Do you understand? It was a lie. There was no explosive, but Hunter was too broken to doubt me. I walked out to the edge of the pier, looking toward the city skyline. Somewhere in that maze of lights, my son was dying, and the men responsible were celebrating their victory. They thought they were the predators because they had a judge and a gang. They were about to learn that a SEAL doesn't need a badge or a law. He only needs a target. I picked up my phone and dialed a contact I hadn't used in years. A man who specialized in deniable logistics. I need a blueprint of the Northside Foundry, I said. And I need a heavy ordnance drop at Point Charlie. The quiet time is over. I'm going in hot. Dawn crawled over the harbor in pale strips of orange and gray. The world looked so calm that you'd never guess a war was about to start. I stood at the edge of the pier, the wind cutting through my jacket, staring at the waves. Somewhere across that dark skyline, my son was fighting for one more heartbeat, and the men who took everything from him were still breathing. The file from my old contact arrived at 6:14 a.m. sharp. Northside Foundry, 3 floors, multiple entry points, a fortified security office, reinforced walls, underground loading tunnels. If I stepped inside through the front door, I wouldn't make it 10 feet. That was fine. I didn't plan on walking through the front. I drove back to my house, not for rest, but to arm up. The place looked even emptier than the night before, as if grief itself had stripped the walls. My phone buzzed again. A voice message from Clara. Logan, they said Mason's heart stopped again. The doctors don't know if. Please come back. Please. Her voice cracked at the end, and for a moment, my chest tightened like a vice. But my son didn't need prayers, he needed peace. And peace was something I only knew how to buy in blood. While loading my gear, I glanced toward the framed family photo on the mantel. Me, Clara, Mason, and Hunter. I left it face down before I walked out. Some ghosts didn't deserve to be seen again. Inside the truck, Hunter sat slumped forward, half asleep, half broken. When he saw me carrying fresh ammo, his eyes widened like a trapped animal's. You're really going through with this? He stammered. This isn't revenge anymore, I said quietly. It's correction. He swallowed. You don't understand. If Victor dies, it doesn't end. Quentin will take over. Vance will cover it up. That's how it works. They won't have time to adjust. I cut him off. When I go in, the whole network goes dark. I grabbed his collar, forcing him to look me dead in the eye. But before I go, you're going to tell me what you haven't yet. How deep you're in with them. Hunter tried to turn his face away, but there's something about silence that demands truth. It wasn't just the debt, he finally whispered. Clara knew. That stopped me cold. He went on, his words tumbling fast, desperate. She knew about the loan. About Victor. I told her I was in trouble, and she said she'd handle it. She met with Quentin behind your back. I thought she'd told you. I thought she warned you before Christmas. I stepped away, my mind spinning, rage and disbelief crashing together like a blackout thunderclap. Clara. She'd stood in our kitchen that night, pretending everything was normal. Pretending she didn't already know death was coming through our door. She said it was for your safety, Hunter whispered. She said if I talked, if I told you, it would make things worse. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There were some wounds too deep for words. I climbed into the truck, the engine growling to life. While the sun broke the horizon, I drove toward the North Side Foundry, the building's smoking stacks piercing the skyline like black spears. The roads were empty, silent, the city still asleep. On the outskirts, I ditched the truck behind a row of derelict freight cars and approached on foot, silent, steady, methodical. The closer I got, the more my heartbeat slowed. The part of me that hurt, the part that grieved, receded into that cold place where only the mission mattered. Through the binoculars, I saw the guards. 8 on rotation, 3 at the gate, 2 near the furnace room, 1 sniper on the roof. There were cameras, but they were wireless, the kind that could be scrambled for exactly 22 seconds using a signal disruptor. I moved in when the clock hit 7:03. A quick dart throw took out the rooftop sniper. His body slumped without sound. I scaled the ladder, retrieved his rifle, and set it for overwatch. Below me, 2 armed men were talking near the loading dock, their laughter echoing faintly off the steel walls. I waited until the wind turned, masking the sound, then moved down silently. A blade kissed one throat, a silenced shot ended the other. They were dead before they hit the floor. I slipped through the warehouse corridors, rust, oil, metal, sweat, and found the main office above the factory floor. Behind the reinforced glass, Victor sat in a leather chair, smoking a cigar and laughing into a phone. I took my position outside the door. One hand checked the pistol magazine, the other reached for the breaching charge. My thumb hovered over the detonator. Then I heard voices. From inside. Quentin, we finished cleaning up the pier mess, Victor said, his voice muffled through the wall. The old man took the bait. He's probably dead by now. You can tell Vance we're clear. Then another voice replied. Smooth, practiced. It was Quentin. He won't stop, Victor. You don't understand what you triggered. That man's a ghost from command files. They call him the Reaper. You think bullets will stop him? No. The only way to kill him is before he knows who's holding the knife. And he already does. The words sliced through me more than I expected. They knew. They knew who I was. I kicked the door open. Victor's cigar hit the desk. Quentin froze, mid-call. I fired once, just above Victor's hand. The bullet snapped through the phone. The two of them flinched like startled animals. You wanted a war, I said. Congratulations. You got one. Victor reached under the desk. I shot the drawer before his fingers could touch metal. The explosion of wood and steel made him scream as splinters tore into his wrist. Quentin tried to back toward the exit, but I moved on him first, slamming him into the wall hard enough to rattle the glass. Where's your judge now? I hissed. Who's watching you, Quentin? He coughed, choking. He'll bury you. The court, the press, everyone. You think this ends clean? It doesn't need to end clean, I said. It just needs to end. I turned the pistol on Victor. You shot my boy. You walked into my home, dragged blood across my floor, and laughed about it. What? Victor's face twisted, the fear in his eyes warring with pure arrogance. Because you were supposed to be dead. You were the payoff. Vance wanted the war hero gone before the election. Quentin made the call. I looked at Quentin, who stayed silent, his face shattered in terrified disbelief. So that was the truth. My family's tragedy had been a cover-up, a political favor dressed as street violence. They didn't just try to rob me. They tried to erase me. I exhaled once, steady. Then you tell them, I said softly. You tell them the Reapers come home. I raised my weapon. A shot thundered from behind me. My whole body jolted. I spun around. Hunter stood in the doorway, holding one of the dead guard's rifles. Smoke curled from the barrel. His eyes were glassy, his voice shaking. Don't do it, Logan. Please. He'll kill Clara if you. She made her choice, I said through clenched teeth. He took another step forward, aim wavering between me and Victor. Then maybe I didn't make mine yet. The barrel of his gun trembled. I could almost see the sweat dripping off his palms. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. Someone had triggered the silent alarm. I glanced at the desk clock. 7:09. Time was gone. Drop it, Hunter, I said. Don't make me finish this with your blood too. The next second was agony stretched thin. 3 lives in balance. Betrayal reaching its breaking point. Hunter's voice cracked. I'm sorry, Logan. The world didn't explode. It went quiet. Hunter's finger tightened on the trigger, his knuckles white, but his eyes were flooded with tears. He wasn't a killer. He was a coward caught in a spider web. I didn't raise my gun. I just looked at him, letting the cold weight of my gaze pin him to the spot. If you pull that trigger, Hunter, you lose the only person who can keep you alive, I said, my voice steady and low. Victor won't reward you. He'll execute you to close the loop. Hunter's sob was a ragged, pathetic sound. The barrel of the rifle dipped toward the floor. In that split second of hesitation, I moved. I didn't shoot him. I closed the distance and disarmed him with a single, fluid strike to his wrist. The rifle clattered to the floor, and I shoved him into the corner. Stay down, I growled. I turned back to the desk, but Quentin had used the distraction. He had vanished through a side door leading to the catwalks. Victor was still there, clutching his mangled hand, his face purple with rage. You're done, Seal. Victor roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. My men are coming up. You're trapped in a box. I'm not trapped in here with them, I whispered, leaning over the desk until our noses almost touched. They're trapped in here with me. The sirens were screaming outside now, but they weren't police sirens. They were the foundry's emergency alarms. The gate guards were dead, and the remaining Vipers were swarming the floor below. I could hear the heavy thud of boots on the metal stairs. I grabbed Victor by the collar and dragged him toward the window overlooking the furnace floor. Below us, the massive vats of molten iron glowed with a terrifying, hellish light, throwing long, distorted shadows against the walls. You like to play with fire, Victor? I asked. I pulled a thermite charge from my vest, a gift from my old supply contact. I slapped it onto the reinforced glass of the office window and pulled the pin. 3 seconds later, the glass didn't just break, it liquefied. The heat hit us like a physical blow. I threw Victor onto the catwalk outside the office, the metal grating sizzling under his boots. I looked down. 12 men were fan out across the floor, their weapons aimed upward. There he is. Kill him, someone yelled. The air filled with lead. I dived behind a heavy steel pillar, sparks flying as bullets chewed into the metal. I didn't return fire immediately. I waited. I counted the rhythm of their shots. Most of them were spraying and praying, pure amateur hour. I pulled a flashbang and dropped it straight down into the center of the group. Bang! While they were clutching their ears and eyes, I went to work. This wasn't a firefight, it was an extraction. I picked them off with surgical precision, one shot, one drop. I moved along the catwalk, a shadow in the steam and orange glow, appearing and disappearing before they could track my muzzle flash. 3 down. 5. 7. The foundry floor became a graveyard of tough guys who realized too late that they had picked a fight with a ghost. I reached the end of the catwalk and saw Quentin. He was at the emergency exit, frantically punching a code into a keypad. I didn't use a bullet. I picked up a discarded iron rebar and threw it like a spear. It didn't kill him. It went through the meat of his shoulder, pinning his expensive suit and his arm to the wooden door frame. Quentin screamed, a high-pitched, girlish sound that cut through the roar of the furnaces. I walked toward him, my boots clanging rhythmically on the metal. Victor was crawling away in the opposite direction, but he was going nowhere. I stood over Quentin, who was sobbing and trying to pull the rebar out. "The judge," I said. "Where is the evidence?" "The ledger Hunter talked about." In the safe, at the club," Quentin gasped, his face slick with sweat. "The Midnight Lounge. 3rd floor. Please. I was just the middleman." "There are no middlemen in a murder, Quentin. Only accomplices." I looked back at the office. Hunter was gone. He'd slipped out during the chaos. It didn't matter. He was a broken man. He wasn't the target. I turned my attention to Victor. He had reached a dead end on the catwalk, right above the primary cooling vat. He looked at me, then at the drop, his bravado finally replaced by the raw, naked fear of a man who knows his time is up. "You can't do this," Victor stammered. "I have people. You have nothing," I said. I didn't push him. I just stood there. The police were finally at the gates. I could see the blue and red lights flashing through the high windows. I had minutes before I became the villain in the evening news. I looked at Victor one last time. "My son is 19. He had a whole life. You traded it for a gambling debt and a political favor. I'll give you the money. Double it. I don't want your money, Victor. I want you to feel the weight of every life you've ruined." I stepped back and pulled my phone out. I played the recording I'd captured in the office. Victor and Quentin admitting to the setup, the judge's involvement, and the hit on my house. I hit send to every major news outlet in the state. "The system won't protect you anymore," I said. I turned and vanished into the steam of the foundry floor just as the SWAT team breached the main doors. I didn't stay to watch the arrest. I had one more stop to make. The Midnight Lounge. As I slipped out into the cold morning air, my phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. "Mason is awake. He's asking for you." The ice in my heart cracked, just for a second. But I couldn't go to him yet. If I went now, the judge would win. I had to finish the quiet revenge. I had to burn the ledger. The hospital was only 5 miles away, but it felt like it was on another planet. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn the wheel, to go to Mason, to hold my son's hand and tell him I was there. But the Reaper in me knew better. If I went to him now, I'd be bringing a storm of police and assassins to his bedside. To protect him, I had to stay a ghost. I drove toward the city center, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The news was already breaking. I could hear the radio anchors stumbling over the leaked recording. Victor's voice, the mention of Judge Vance, the cold admission of a setup. The city was waking up to a scandal, but I knew how the powerful played this game. They'd call it a deep fake. They'd call me a disgruntled, unstable veteran. The Midnight Lounge was a sleek, black glass building that looked more like a fortress than a nightclub. This was where the city's elite came to sin in private. It was 8:30 a.m. The club was closed to the public, but the private security at the door told me the high rollers were still inside, cleaning up the night's messes. I parked in an underground garage 2 blocks away. My reflection in the window was harrowing. I was covered in soot, dried blood, and the hollow stare of a man who had seen the end of the world. I threw on a dark trench coat to hide my tactical vest and moved toward the club's service entrance. I didn't use explosives this time. I used a simple hack, a cloned keycard I'd grabbed from Quentin's pocket at the foundry. The door hissed open, and I stepped into the smell of expensive gin and stale cigarettes. "Hey, who the hell are you?" A voice barked from the end of the hallway. It was a suit, one of Vance's personal bodyguards. He was reaching for his holster, but I was already in his space. I caught his wrist, twisted it until the bone groaned, and slammed his face into the marble wall. I caught his body before it hit the floor, dragging him into a broom closet. Too loud, I whispered to the empty hallway. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The doors opened to a mahogany row hallway. At the very end sat the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite. I could hear voices, angry, panicked voices. The recording is out there, Vance. We have to move the assets now. That was Quentin's voice. He must have escaped or been let go by dirty cops at the foundry. Shut up, a deeper, more refined voice roared. Judge Vance, the police are looking for Logan. By the time they look at us, the ledger will be ash and the witness will be dead. Did you send the team to the hospital? My heart stopped. The world went red. Yeah, Quentin replied. They're entering through the service basement. The kid won't make it to noon. I didn't wait. I didn't plan. I kicked the mahogany doors so hard the hinges shrieked. The room was opulent, gold leaf, velvet, and the stench of corruption. Judge Vance sat behind a massive desk, a shredder whining beside him. Quentin stood by the window, his arm in a makeshift sling. They both froze. Vance, a man who spent his life sentencing others to cages, looked at me and saw his own death sentence written in my eyes. You, Vance breathed, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You should be in a cell. I've been in hell, Judge. A cell would be a vacation, I said, my voice a low, vibrating growl. Call off the hit at the hospital. Now. Vance tried to regain his composure, straightening his silk tie. You have nothing, Logan. A leaked tape? Any lawyer will have that thrown out as coerced. You're a vigilante. A murderer. You're the one who's going to lose everything. I already lost my son's peace, I said, stepping toward the desk. Now I'm just deciding how many people I take with me. I leveled my pistol at Vance's chest. The phone. Call them off, or I start with your knees and work my way up. Go ahead, Vance sneered, a desperate glint in his eye. Kill a superior court judge in cold blood. See how fast the world turns on you. You'll never see your son again. Suddenly, the door behind me opened. I spun around, weapon raised, but it wasn't a gunman. It was a woman, elegant, composed, holding a digital tablet. It was the city prosecutor, Eliza. She looked from me to the judge, then to the piles of half-shredded paper on the floor. Put the gun down, Logan, she said softly. I've been building a case against Vance for 3 years. I have the wiretaps. I have the bank statements. If you kill him now, he becomes a martyr. If you let me take him, he dies in a cage, stripped of every cent and every ounce of dignity. He sent men to kill my son. I rasped, the rage vibrating in my arm. He's doing it right now. Eliza didn't flinch. I already called the state police. They intercepted the team at the hospital 4 minutes ago. Mason is safe. He's under 24-hour guard by people I trust. The tension in my chest snapped. The pistol felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I looked at Vance, who was now trembling, realizing his legal shield had finally shattered. It's over, Harvey, Eliza said to the judge. The quiet justice has arrived. I lowered the gun. I didn't feel relief. I felt a strange, cold emptiness. I walked over to the desk, picked up the remaining ledger that hadn't reached the shredder, and tossed it to Eliza. Make sure he never sees the sun again, I said. I walked past them, out of the club, and into the blinding morning light. I didn't care about the trials or the headlines. I had a promise to keep. The city was in a frenzy, but the air around the Vance estate was deathly still. Eliza's legal justice was moving through the courts, but the Reaper in me knew that men like Vance always had a contingency. My burner phone buzzed, a secure line from a contact still inside the hospital. Logan, the state police are here, but there's a problem. 2 of the officers on the perimeter didn't check out. They vanished when the real units arrived. Vance isn't surrendering, he's liquidating. I knew exactly what that meant. In the world of high-level corruption, liquidating meant erasing every witness, including the ones in hospital beds and the ones who knew too much. Vance wasn't at the club anymore. He had fled to his private estate, a fortified mansion on the cliffs of the North Shore. He was waiting for a private chopper to take him to a non-extradition country. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Eliza. This was the Hollywood moment, the one where the system fails and the soldier takes the field. I arrived at the estate at 11:30 p.m. The rain was coming down in sheets, a cold Atlantic gale that blurred the line between the sky and the sea. The mansion sat like a dark crown on the cliffside, surrounded by a 12-foot stone wall and infrared sensors. I wasn't the man in the Christmas sweater anymore. I was wearing full combat blacks, a suppressed 416 carbine slung across my chest, and the NVGs flipped down over my eyes. The world turned a ghostly, digital green. I didn't breach the gate. I moved to the cliffside, where the jagged rocks met the crashing surf. No one guards the sea in a storm. They think the ocean is their wall. I climbed the wet stone with bare hands, the salt stinging my cuts, until I rolled over the iron railing onto the manicured lawn. 2 guards moved past the fountain, their breath hitching in the cold. They were carrying high-end subguns, looking bored. I moved like a predator in tall grass. Thwip, thwip. 2 silenced rounds. They dropped without a sound, their bodies disappearing into the shadows of the hedges. I moved toward the house, my heart rate a steady 60 beats per minute. This was the flow. I breached the side terrace. Inside, the mansion was a museum of stolen lives, expensive art, marble floors, and the smell of high-priced fear. I moved through the kitchen and into the grand foyer. Upstairs, "Get the bags to the roof," a voice barked. I saw Quentin. He was at the top of the stairs, clutching a briefcase, his face bruised and desperate. Behind him, 2 more mercenaries were dragging a heavy trunk. I stepped into the light of the chandelier. "Going somewhere, Quentin?" He froze, his eyes bulging as he looked down the barrel of my rifle. You're supposed to be dead." The team at the hospital said. "The team at the hospital is currently being processed by the coroner." I lied, my voice a cold steel blade. "Drop the bag." The mercenaries didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons, but I was already mid-roll behind a marble pillar. The foyer erupted in a storm of glass and plaster. I leaned out, firing in controlled pairs. 1 merc went down with a shot to the high chest. The second ducked into the library. I tossed a flashbang up the stairs. The explosion shattered the crystals of the chandelier, raining glass down like diamonds. I charged up the stairs through the smoke. Quentin was crawling toward the master suite, his briefcase forgotten. I didn't stop for him. I kicked in the double doors of the office. Judge Vance was standing by a wall safe, his hands shaking as he stuffed stacks of $100 bills into a duffel bag. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't look like a judge. He looked like a small, pathetic old man. "Logan, wait," he screamed, backing toward the balcony. "I can give you names. I can give you the governors, the senators, the people who really ordered the hit." "I don't care about the names," I said, stepping closer. "I care about the boy who can't breathe without a machine because you wanted to balance your books." I reached out, grabbed him by the throat, and slammed him against the glass doors. The balcony overlooked the jagged rocks and the churning Atlantic 100 feet below. "You spent your life playing God," I whispered. "Now let's see if he catches you." I dragged him out onto the balcony, the wind howling around us. I held him over the railing, his feet dangling over the abyss. He was sobbing, begging, offering me millions. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my tactical vest. I pulled it out with one hand while holding the judge with the other. It was a video call. I swiped it open. It was Mason. He was pale, his chest bandaged, but his eyes were open. He was smiling, a weak, tired smile. "Dad?" His voice was a tiny whisper. "Dad, come home. Please." I looked at the judge, then back at my son's face on the screen. The rage that had been fueling me for 48 hours suddenly felt heavy. If I dropped Vance, I was the monster they said I was. I'd be giving Mason a father who was a murderer. I pulled Vance back over the railing and threw him onto the wet stone of the balcony. "You're not worth his soul," I said. I tied Vance's hands with zip ties and dialed Eliza. "He's at the North Shore estate," I told her. "Bring the feds." "And Eliza?" "Tell the hospital I'm on my way." I walked away, leaving the judge weeping in the rain. I had won the war, but as I headed for my truck, I saw a figure standing by the gate. It was Clara. She was soaked to the bone, her face unreadable. "Logan," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something you still don't know." The rain lashed against the windshield of the truck, but inside, the air was suffocatingly still. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling in her lap. We were miles away from the mansion, headed toward the hospital, but I pulled over into a dark overlook above the crashing surf. I couldn't look at my son until I knew what kind of lie I was carrying. "Speak, Clara," I said. My voice sounded like a stranger's, hollow and dead. "You think this was all about a gambling debt, Logan? You think Hunter is that important?" She finally looked at me, and I saw a coldness in her eyes I had never noticed in 20 years of marriage. Hunter didn't point them to the house because he owed money. He pointed them there because I told him to. The world seemed to tilt. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been hit by a frag out. "What are you talking about?" "The stash, Logan. The one the Vipers were looking for. It wasn't money. It was the encryption keys for the shadow accounts Vance used to fund his campaign." She leaned closer, her voice a sharp whisper. "I've been Vance's private accountant for 6 years. While you were away on missions, I was the one building this city's skeletons." I stared at her, the woman I had slept next to, the mother of my child. "You worked for the man who tried to kill our son? He wasn't supposed to be there," she screamed, her composure finally breaking into jagged shards. "The Vipers were supposed to hit the house while we were at the Christmas Eve service. It was supposed to be a burglary. I was going to hand over the keys, Vance would settle my exit from his firm, and we would move to the coast. We would have been free, Logan. Free from your nightmares. Free from the military life that was rotting us from the inside. But Mason stayed home," I whispered, the horror sinking into my marrow. "He stayed home to surprise us with that party. I tried to stop them," she sobbed, clutching her head. "When I saw the SUV pull up, I tried to call it off, but Quentin wouldn't listen. He said once the wheels are in motion, you don't stop. He wanted those keys to blackmail Vance later. My greed, my escape, it almost killed my boy." I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to open the door to breathe. The betrayal wasn't from a gang. It wasn't even from the corrupt judge. It was from the very heart of my home. My wife had traded our sanctuary for a suitcase full of digital blood money. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "The keys." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, unassuming silver USB drive. "Vance thinks Quentin has them. Quentin thinks they were destroyed in the Foundry fire. But I kept them. They're the only thing keeping us alive, Logan. If we give these to the feds, we're both going to prison. If we keep them, we can disappear." I looked at the silver drive. It represented the lives of every person Vance had crushed. It represented the bullets in my son's chest. And it represented the woman I no longer knew. "There is no we anymore, Clara," I said. I took the drive from her hand. Her face went pale. "Logan, don't. Think about Mason. He needs a mother. He needs a mother who didn't invite wolves into his bedroom," I replied. I put the truck back into gear and drove in silence. When we reached the hospital, the state police were everywhere. I saw Eliza standing near the entrance, looking exhausted but victorious. I didn't let Clara out of the truck. I pulled up to a sergeant I recognized. "Take her into custody," I said, my heart feeling like it was made of lead. "She's a material witness and an accomplice to the Vance Rico case. She has a full confession to make." "Logan, no. Please," Clara shrieked as they pulled her from the car. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked into the hospital, past the armed guards, and into the ICU. Mason was there, propped up on pillows. He looked so small under the white sheets, surrounded by the hum of machines. But when he saw me, his face lit up. "Hey, Dad," he whispered, his voice raspy from the tubes. You look like you've been through it." I sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. It was warm. It was real. "I'm okay, buddy. It's over. Everyone's going to answer for what happened." "Where's Mom?" he asked. I felt a tear finally break through the stone mask I'd been wearing. I squeezed his hand. The weight of the last 48 hours finally crashing down on me. She's dealing with the police, Mason. There's a lot to talk about later. But right now, it's just us. Okay. He nodded, closing his eyes, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time. I sat there in the quiet of the room, the deadliest seal in the world, feeling like the weakest man alive. I had the keys to the city's corruption in my pocket and the remains of my life in the hallway. But as I watched my son's chest rise and fall, I knew the mission wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about what comes after. It was about the quiet justice of a father who would burn the world down to save his son, even if he had to stand in the ashes alone. The hospital room was filled with the soft, rhythmic chirping of the heart monitor, a sound that, for the first time in days, didn't feel like a countdown. I sat by Mason's bed as the first light of a new morning filtered through the blinds. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean, though I knew the mud I had uncovered would take years to settle. Eliza entered the room quietly, holding a coffee cup she hadn't touched. She looked at me, then at the silver USB drive sitting on the bedside table. I didn't say a word as I pushed it toward her. That small piece of metal held the power to topple 3 decades of political dynasties. It was the quiet justice I had promised. "This is everything," Eliza whispered, her voice thick with awe. "The shadow accounts, the wire transfers, the names of the officers on Vance's payroll. Logan, you realize what this does? It doesn't just put Vance away. It guts the entire system." "Good," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Burn it down. Every brick." "And Clara?" she asked tentatively. I looked at Mason, who was sleeping peacefully. She made a choice to protect a lifestyle over her family. Now she has to live with the consequences. "Tell the prosecutor I'll testify if I have to, but I want Mason kept out of it. He's seen enough blood." Eliza nodded, her eyes reflecting a deep respect. "He's a lucky kid, Logan. Most fathers would have just called the police. You went to war for him." "I didn't have a choice," I replied. "A soldier protects his own. A father does even more." I didn't wait for the headlines. I didn't wait for the televised arrests of Judge Vance, Quentin, or the crooked cops. I spent the next few weeks in that hospital room, watching the color return to my son's face. We didn't talk about the night of the shooting. We didn't talk about his mother. We talked about his future, about finishing college, about traveling, about the life he still had ahead of him. Instead of the usual jump forward in time, I decided to live in the present. I sold our house, the one with the stained floors and the ghosts in the hallways. I took what was left of my savings and bought a small cabin on the edge of a lake in the mountains. No gates, no infrared sensors, no secret safes. Just the sound of the wind through the pines and the splash of a fishing line hitting the water. A month later, I stood on the porch of the cabin. Mason was walking down by the water, his gait almost back to normal, his laughter echoing across the lake. He was whole again. I looked at my hands, the hands that had taken lives to save his. They were steady now. I had lost my marriage, my home, and my peace of mind. But as Mason looked back at me and waved, I realized I hadn't lost the only thing that mattered. The deadliest seal was gone. In his place was a man who had finally found a reason to put down his weapon. Justice wasn't found in a courtroom or at the end of a barrel. It was found in the quiet moments of a life reclaimed. This has been a journey of heartbreak and ultimate redemption. When a family's trust is shattered and the law turns its back, how far would you truly go to protect the person you love most? Would you become the monster to defeat the monsters? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Logan's choice. Did he do the right thing by turning in his own wife to ensure true justice? Also, please let me know in the comments. What city or country are you watching from? If this story moved you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to Betrayal Stories Lab. It helps us keep bringing these cinematic tales to life. I also want to hear from you. What kind of stories should I write next? Do you want more military revenge, more family mysteries, or stories of emotional healing? Your feedback shapes this channel. Until we meet again in the next thriller or epic revenge story, take care of yourselves and stay safe.